Boldwood presents The Garden of Shared Stories, written by Clare Swatman and read by Rebecca Norfolk and Marston York. Part 1. Chapter 1. Emma. It had been an absolute horror of a day when it happened. Clients demanding the impossible, my boss taking her frustration out on me, and then, to top it all off, someone stealing my homemade salad from the communal fridge. Now, as I stomped along the familiar path through the park towards home, I couldn't get the injustice of it all out of my head. Luckily, the more distance I put between me and the office, the more the fury began to subside, gradually reducing from a raging torrent to a trickle, until in its place settled an exhaustion so intense I thought my legs might give way. I stopped dead in the middle of the path, suddenly desperate to sit down. To my right, a group of pre-teens were playing a rowdy game of rounders. To my left, a few metres away, was the rose garden, inside which stood the bandstand that only occasionally hosted any music, but was a popular choice for teenagers to smoke and snog away from parents' prying eyes. It was empty right now, though, so I hurried towards it. A cool breeze stirred the roses, and the sun hovered above the treetops like a large round of cheese as I sank gratefully onto the bench, closed my eyes, and tipped my face up towards the light. As the evening sun warmed my skin, the tension began to leave my body, draining away like bathwater down a plug hole. The light behind my eyelids glowed orange, and an occasional cheer from the Rounders game drifted through my mind, barely causing a ripple. In the old days, before Greg died, I would have wanted nothing more than to go straight home and offload my worries and stresses of the day onto him. He would have done the same in return, and, although he rarely let the little things get to him in the way I knew I often did, it always helped to know we had each other's backs, no matter what. But these days, the only thing I had to hurry home for was another depressing meal for one, a glass of wine, and re-watching episodes of Fleabag until my eyeballs shriveled up. It wasn't the most appealing or enticing thought. In fact, it made the space inside me where Greg should be swell a little more, so that I felt even emptier than usual. I swiped at my cheek and took a deep breath in and... "Are you all right?" My eyes flew open, and when I turned my head, there was a man beside me, watching me with a strange expression on his face. I hadn't heard him approach, and I felt suddenly vulnerable, sitting there with a damp face, and no idea where this man had sprung from. I looked away without replying. "I'm really sorry to disturb you." I wanted to berate him for having disturbed me anyway, but I didn't have the energy, so instead I gave a small nod and stared out across the gardens. I hoped he'd get the hint and move away, but I could still feel him there, and eventually I looked back at him, saying nothing. "Sorry, I'm not a weirdo," he said, with a small smile. "I just hate seeing people sad. I should leave you be." I shook my head. "It's fine. I'm fine, but thank you." He hooked his right ankle onto his left knee and spread his fingers across his calf. They were long and slender, and I couldn't help but notice, ringless. I glanced down at my own ring finger, where the gold band I should have taken off months ago still sat, etching a groove into my skin, a reminder of everything I'd lost. I don't know why I did it to myself. We sat in silence for a few minutes, and I watched the Rounders match in the distance, which seemed to have become more shouty since I'd sat down. A little to the left, a dog squatted in the grass, its owner waiting patiently with a green bag. I thought about Greg again, and how he would always laugh at people who carried bags of dog poo around with them, swinging from their belts like some kind of turdy treasure. Despite my sadness, I felt a smile spread across my lips, marvelling at how something as simple as a dog doing its business could bring Greg so vividly into my mind again, as though he was still right beside me. "I haven't seen you here before," said the voice. The image of Greg popped like a balloon as I shook my head. "I've not lived here long," I said, more out of politeness than because I particularly wanted to start a conversation with this stranger. "I'm just on my way home from a shitty day at work." "You too, eh?" I nodded, even though he wasn't looking at me. Then, "You can tell me about it if you like. I'm a good listener. At least, that's what people tell me." What I really wanted to do was get up and walk home and lock myself away from the world again. But I didn't say that, because I'm far too polite. I'm okay, thank you. Fair enough. He leaned forward, and I caught a glimpse of his dark blonde hair out of the corner of my eye as he lifted a small rucksack from the floor onto his lap. I know you've probably been told never to accept sweets from strangers, but would you like one? I glanced over at the bag he was offering me. It was a paper bag, blue with yellow writing on it, picking out the words pick and mix, and I smiled again despite myself. I peered inside the bag and raised my eyebrows at him. Fizzy cola bottles, eh? He grinned, his teeth slightly crooked. Dimples appeared at the side of his mouth. I looked away again. What can I tell you? I'm a child. I laughed and stuck my hand inside, pulled out a fizzy worm and a cola bottle, and popped the worm in my mouth. As I held it there a moment, letting the sugar fizz on my tongue, I tried to work out what it was that was snagging on my brain, what was slightly off about this moment. But I couldn't grasp it, and in the end I let it go and chewed my sweet slowly. God, I haven't had one of these for years, I said. What? You don't know what you're missing. He held out the bag again, and this time I chose a fried egg sweet. Sweets like this bring back memories, I said, pressing the sweet onto my tongue. Good ones? Were they? Childhood images of me throwing up in the car after eating a giant bag of pick and mix my dad had bought me on holiday in Harrogate one year. My brother and I shoveling sweet after sweet into our mouths as we traipsed, bored, round Ripon Castle. Hours spent agonising over whether to splash out on a 10-pence wham bar, a 20-pence piece clutched in my damp palm, Greg presenting me with a bag of Haribos for our first year of being together, slipping the ring sweet onto my finger and asking me to marry him. Mostly, I said. Good. He set the bag down on the bench between us. Help yourself? I'm fine, thanks. Please, I can't stop once I start. You'll be doing me a favour. Well, if you put it like that, I said, diving in once more and grabbing a few soft chews between my thumb and finger, holding them in my palm. It was unexpected, this moment. It wasn't often I spoke to strangers, and especially not to men. Since Greg had died more than 2 years earlier, I'd locked myself away from the world and certainly didn't welcome chats with random men on the way home from work. Rachel, my best friend, said it was because I was terrified of someone asking me about Greg, but it was more than that. Since Greg died, I didn't feel as though I had any room inside me to take on any more people. What if I let someone in and they did even more damage? I'm not sure my poor fractured heart could cope with that. Yet there was something about this man that felt calming, that felt as though sitting in silence, chewing sweets together, was all that needed to be happening at this moment in time. It was a surprise. I watched a bird hop across the patch of grass in front of us. The sun had dipped even lower now, behind the row of trees, and I shivered as the breeze made its way through the gaps between the slats of wood. Would you like to borrow my jumper? Sorry? I turned to find him holding out a blue sweatshirt. I was on the verge of saying no on autopilot, when instead I blurted out, Thank you. I took the jumper and slipped it over my head gratefully, the scent of washing powder filling my nose. The kids were packing up their game of rounders now, pulling on coats, picking up bags and heading in different directions across the park. I should probably be going home too. But something was holding me here a little longer. I'm Nick, by the way, Nick Flynn, the man beside me said, holding his hand across the gap between us. I looked down at it for a moment, then held my own out. As our skin touched, I felt a jolt of something, like a spark of static, and I flinched. I wasn't sure whether he'd noticed anything. His skin felt cool to the touch, and something inside me felt odd, a little out of place. Emma Vickers, I said, tucking my hands beneath my legs against the cool grain of the wood. Nice to meet you. You too. So, you said you've just moved in round here? That's right. How are you finding it? I shrugged. It's fine. You don't sound too sure. I sighed. I never talked about Greg. It hurt too much even to think about the hole he'd left inside me. Rachel told me it would be good to tell people about him, that talking about him, about how much he loved me, about the happy times we had together, would be much better for me than keeping everything all scrunched up inside. But somehow I just couldn't find the words. How do you tell someone that you've lost the person who made you you without sounding like you've gone insane? Sorry, I don't mean to pry, Nick said, and I realised I must have been quiet for slightly too long. No, it's okay, I said. I lost someone and needed a fresh start. It sounded so trite, so insignificant, and yet that one word, someone, contained everything. I lost someone too. Oh? I turned to face him and he was still looking down at the ground, not at me. When he did finally turn his head, there was a pain in his eyes that I recognised. My wife died 2.5 years ago. I stared at him, at the dark glow of his eyes, the shadows on his cheeks in the fading light of the sun, and I saw him, really saw him. Sorry wasn't what he needed to hear. I understood that from the endless times I'd heard it from well-meaning friends and acquaintances. All it did, for me at least, was make me feel even more alone than ever. It's shit, isn't it? His eyes widened and the corners of his mouth twitched upwards, and I knew I'd said the right thing. He gave a nod and looked down at the paper bag of sweets on the bench between us, his long eyelashes creating spider-like shadows on his cheeks. Really shit, he agreed. I looked out into the garden, watching the roses bob in the gentle early evening breeze. I don't talk about it, I said slowly. My husband died, and my best friend Rachel thinks I should talk about how I feel all the time, thinks it will help me come to terms with it. But I don't know how I can, because when I do, it just makes me feel sad and other people feel uncomfortable. I felt him shift beside me, angle his body in my direction. Andy, that's my twin brother, says the same. He thinks I should try to talk it through because it would help me to move on, but I honestly just don't know how. Me neither. How can you put into words how much you miss someone? How it feels every single day as though you need to remind yourself to get up, get dressed, carry on, while all the time it feels as though you're being pressed down by a heavy weight. Or that some days all you want to do is sit and wallow in your memories of happier times, while other days you can't let yourself think about them at all because it might break you completely. I looked at him. I felt breathless. My mum, Rachel, all my other friends had tried and tried to get me to talk to them about my feelings, about how it would feel to move on and look for someone else, and I simply hadn't been able to. And yet now here I was, opening up to this man on a bench on a random March evening. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt good to have someone who seemed to understand exactly what I was going through. Perhaps it meant nothing at all, and yet somehow I felt sure it did. It's getting late. I looked out across the garden. Shadows had begun to fill in the gaps between the still leafless trees. The sky was dark blue, a band of buttery yellow outlining the horizon. I should go home. I didn't move. I didn't want to, not yet, even though I knew I ought to. I've enjoyed talking to you. Will you come again and meet me here? What? I peered at him, his face in shadow. I just thought it would be nice to see you. You know, to chat, if you're passing again, but no pressure. Yes. The word was out before I planned it. I mean, sure, that would be nice. Great, great. He clasped his hands together, rubbing them like he was warming them in front of a fire. He stood, and I did the same. The gap between us remained, but it felt like there was something there, some invisible force pulling us together. I took a deliberate step back. Well, it was lovely to meet you, Nick Flynn. His name felt strange on my tongue. It was lovely to meet you too, Emma Vickers. We hovered a moment, stuck in time. Then he bent down, picked up his rucksack and his bag of sweets, and flashed me a smile. Same time Monday? Same time Monday, I confirmed. Then he turned and stepped off the wooden platform, disappearing almost immediately into the shadows. It wasn't until I closed my front door behind me and kicked off my shoes that I realised I was still wearing Nick's jumper. I pulled it off and hung it on the hook next to my jacket so I'd remember to take it back. My hand lingered on it for a moment, trying to remember the strange sensation I'd felt when my hand had touched Nick's, but it wasn't there. I made my way into the kitchen and pulled a portion of chili out of the freezer. Greg had been a stickler for sitting down to a proper meal every evening. After he died, people bought me endless batches of home-cooked lasagnas, shepherd's pies, curries and homemade soup, until my freezer was so full I was in danger of being crushed beneath an avalanche of frozen food every time I opened the door. But at the time, eating was the last thing I felt like doing, instead attempting to numb the pain of losing Greg by downing bottle after bottle of Pinot Grigio. Eventually, Rachel and my mum had stepped in and told me I needed to pull myself together. "There's no point killing yourself as well," Rachel said. "Imagine what Greg would say if he could see what you're doing to yourself," Mum said, a double-pronged attack. And it was that, their tough love, that made me realise I needed to look after myself. They were right. Greg would be furious if he could see me. Which was why I now spent my weekends batch-cooking meals for the week ahead, and I was grateful for it every single evening when I got home from work. As the chili warmed and the rice cooked, I checked my messages. There was one from Rachel reminding me about a trip to the theatre on Sunday night to see our friend Angel in a show about feminism. I tapped out a reply, telling her I was looking forward to it. Would I tell her about my strange encounter in the park? We'd known each other since we were 12 years old, and normally I told her everything. But there was something about what happened today that made me want to wrap it up and keep it to myself for a while longer. Maybe it was just because I thought she'd leap on the merest hint of me being interested in someone. I mean, she loved Greg, everyone did, but as she always said, she loved me too, and she didn't want to see me sad for the rest of my life. "You deserve someone to share your life with," she always told me. And no matter how many times I told her I just wasn't ready and didn't know whether I ever would be, she kept hoping. So no, I didn't think I would tell her about this just yet, however strange it felt to keep it from her. I'd see if anything came of it first. I served up my dinner and took it through to the lounge. I might still try to eat a proper meal every night, but sitting at the table alone just felt too tragic, so I always ate in front of the TV, something Greg would definitely have disapproved of. I pulled a tray from down the side of the sofa, sat down and switched on the TV. I'd been watching a series on Netflix, but as I forked chili into my mouth, I couldn't concentrate on anything that was happening on the screen. Instead, my mind drifted back to earlier this evening, and specifically, to Nick. What exactly was it about our encounter that had lodged itself in my mind? What was the feeling I'd had when I was with him for that brief time? I closed my eyes and tried to remember it, but it was elusive, and eventually I stopped trying. Today was only Thursday, and we weren't meeting again until Monday. He hadn't shown any signs of wanting to give me his phone number or any other way of getting in touch with him, and I had no idea where he lived, which meant that the only way of being certain of seeing him again was to turn up at the bandstand after work on Monday and hope he hadn't just been fobbing me off. Something told me he wasn't. It wasn't until later, as I was lying in bed and trying to sleep, that something else occurred to me. The thought that had snagged on my mind earlier as I'd been sitting with Nick finally revealed itself, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. The sweets Nick had offered me were in a familiar paper bag, a paper bag of pick and mix, exactly like the ones I used to get from Woolworths, a shop that had closed down more than a decade before.
Chapter 2. Nick. It had been a long time since I'd thought about any woman other than Dawn. We'd been together since sixth form, had a bond that we thought nothing would ever break in the way that teenage sweethearts do. But in the end, cancer had been the thing to break that bond. It had been stronger than us both. I still couldn't forgive it. Sometimes when I sat in the living room where Dawn died, or the kitchen where I used to cook as she chatted to me about her day, or the bedroom we shared for the 8 years we lived together, I tried to conjure her in my mind. I closed my eyes and pictured her. Blonde hair splayed out across the pillow, body curled into me on the two-seater sofa as we watched TV. Scarf wrapped round her head when she lost her beautiful curls to the brutal chemotherapy. The dark circles beneath her eyes bruise blue, her cheeks hollow. Still beautiful. Still positive. Tonight, though, I felt different. I felt as though for the first time in 2.5 years, something inside me had shifted. And it was all down to Emma. I couldn't explain it. From the moment I saw her on the bench in the bandstand, her red hair shining in the golden sunlight, I felt drawn to her. There was something magical about her, otherworldly. Had she felt that jolt when we shook hands? I was fairly certain I couldn't have imagined it, but I couldn't bring myself to ask. When we said goodbye, I knew I needed to see her again, so I asked her to meet me there next week. It was the first thing I thought of, and it made perfect sense. No pressure, just a chance to see whether the spark I felt between us was real. I was so relieved when she agreed, but also knew I'd spend the next few days worrying about whether she'd turn up. I'd be disappointed if she didn't, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to examine that too closely. That night, I met my brother Andy in the pub. I hadn't planned to mention it to him. After all, there wasn't really much to tell him apart from the fact that I'd chatted to a pretty woman for half an hour. But in the end, I didn't have to say anything, because the first thing he did was ask me why I looked weird. "What do you mean, weird?" I said as we sat down at our usual table with our pints of Guinness. Our Thursday night pint had been a tradition for as long as we were both legally allowed to drink. A pint in our local, followed by a curry, chicken korma for me, lamb vindaloo for him. No one else came. It was always just the two of us. When Dawn fell ill, she insisted we kept up the tradition, almost pushing me out of the door every Thursday night and reassuring me that she was looking forward to the chance to sleep. After she died, it was the last thing I wanted to do. But Andy knew it was exactly what I needed to stop myself from falling into the abyss of grief. So there we'd sit, pints in front of us, me staring morosely into the depths of the dark brown liquid, him regaling me with stories of his day. And slowly, the fog began to lift. Slowly, I began to tell him about my days, too, about the things I'd seen, the things I'd heard, about my regular trips to the bandstand, Dawn and mine's special place for so many years. He shrugged and wiped froth from his upper lip. "You look happy, I think. Well, happier than I've seen you since—" He stopped, not needing to name it. I spun my pint around on the wooden table. Sidewinder by REM was playing in the background, and the sounds of the regular Thursday night drinkers buzzed around us. I tried to form the words in my mind, but Andy got there before me. "Shit, it's not a woman, is it? Tell me it is." I finally looked up. He was peering at me from over the top of his half-drunk pint, his gaze boring into me like a laser. "Sort of." He took another mouthful, then slammed his glass on the table. "Who is she?" I took a slow sip of my beer, trying to form the words to explain what had happened that afternoon. Andy watched me the whole time, the frown in his forehead deepening the longer he waited. "It's probably nothing," I said. "I just got chatting to someone today." "Right, who? Where?" I puffed out my cheeks. "At the bandstand." His eyebrows beetled upwards, his eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. "I went there as usual," I continued. "Normally it's empty, but today there was a woman sitting on the bench." I swallowed. I sat next to her, hoping she'd leave. Let me have my space back. But she looked so sad that I just ended up asking her if she was okay. I looked up at him. Turns out she'd lost someone too, someone special. We chatted a bit, about Dawn and her husband. Andy studied me thoughtfully, as though trying to work out what to say. He might have been my twin, but I definitely couldn't read his mind right now. "And what did she look like, this woman?" I thought about her hair, glowing like fire in the sunlight, about her porcelain skin, the firecracker spark between us. "She was pretty fit." I grinned, and the mood was lightened. "Good boy," Andy said, holding his hand up for a high five. I smacked mine against it obediently. "Seriously, though, she was lovely." Andy nodded. "This is the first time you've so much as looked at a woman since you lost Dawn." "I know." I shrugged. "It probably doesn't mean anything, but it's good to know I'm not dead inside." Andy leaned forward, pressed his hand against my forearm. "Tell me you at least got her number." I shook my head. "We've arranged to meet again next week." "Where?" "Back at the bandstand." His eyebrows did their beetling thing again. I knew why he was so surprised. The bandstand was the place, apart from our home, where I felt closest to Dawn. Despite the graffiti and the broken slat in the bench and the peeling paint across the roof, it had been a place that was always special to us. It was the place where we'd met, and the place where I'd proposed. After her diagnosis, ovarian cancer, which explained why we'd struggled to get pregnant, we went there every week, just sitting on the bench, holding hands as the rain hammered down on the rickety old roof, or the sun shone through the gaps in it, or a freezing wind chilled us to the bone. Even now I still went there at least once a week, just to sit and think about her, to remember her. Which was why the bandstand being the place where I'd met Emma was such big news to Andy. "I know," I said. "It just felt like the right thing to do. I can't explain it." He stood suddenly and I looked up at him. "I'm going to get us both another pint, and then you're going to tell me everything, and I want every single detail about the woman who has miraculously brought my little brother back to life." I watched as he disappeared towards the bar and tried to work out what I was going to tell him about a woman I still knew next to nothing about. Hours later, back home alone and full of beer and curry, I lay on the sofa and stared blindly at an old episode of Frasier I'd seen dozens of times. It had been one of Dawn's and my favourite shows, and we could recite almost every word of every episode. Today, Daphne was still oblivious to the fact that Niles was in love with her, an early episode, so I turned the sound down low and let it wash over me. I felt strange tonight. Out of sorts in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I also felt another emotion, one that I couldn't seem to shake. Guilt. How could I be thinking about another woman when Dawn had died only 2.5 years ago? We'd been together since we were 16, had both only ever loved each other. Now here I was, aged 31, a widower of less than 3 years, and thinking about someone else. "You know Dawn would want you to be happy, don't you?" Andy had said earlier when I told him over the poppadoms how I felt. I shrugged. Not this soon, though. Andy pressed his hand against mine. "It's not that soon, Nicky." I'd asked if we could talk about something else after that, and sure enough, our chat went back to the usual moaning about work, him telling me what my nieces had been up to, and something funny Mum had said last night. Now my mind returned to Emma. She was just a sketch in my head at the moment, a pencil drawing, no details defined or filled in. And yet I couldn't seem to stop thinking about her all-encompassing smile, the way it drew you in no matter how much you resisted, about the way she'd looked when she told me about losing someone, the pain in her eyes a reflection of my own, about the way her gaze burrowed into my soul. I didn't know what this meant or whether it would lead anywhere, but I did know that I was glad I'd arranged to see her again. The weekend dragged by, but by the time Monday arrived, I felt energized and giddy in a way I hadn't for a long, long time. I couldn't imagine I was over losing Dawn, but it felt refreshing not to wake up feeling as though I'd been crushed beneath a heavy blanket of grief. At 5 o'clock, however, I started to wonder whether I was simply setting myself up for disappointment. What if Emma didn't turn up? What if she'd just been humouring me and hadn't given me a single thought all weekend? But then again, why wouldn't she have just said so? Most days when I walked to the bandstand, I was buried so deep inside my memories of Dawn that I barely saw my surroundings. But today, despite low-lying clouds and a hint of damp in the air, I noticed the kids on skateboards, the couple walking hand in hand ahead of me, the dog barking at a pigeon. Blossom had begun to sprinkle the branches of the trees with colour, and snowdrops and daffodils bowed their heads along the edges of the paths. I felt lighter, as though a darkness had lifted and shown me the world again. Just before I saw the bandstand, I stopped dead. My legs felt weak and my belly squirmed with nerves. Would she be there? I closed my eyes, tipped my head up to the clouds, and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth. I turned the corner. It was empty. I knew it had been a possibility that she wouldn't come, but now that it had come to pass, I didn't quite know what to do. I glanced around. I was a couple of minutes late, but perhaps she was later. I cast my gaze across the park, hoping I'd spot her scurrying towards me, bag banging against her hip, but there was no sign of her. I reached the bandstand and lowered myself onto the bench. The trees above my head rustled in the breeze and a leaf blew in and skittered around my feet, and then, "Hello," a voice said. "Oh, I didn't see you coming. I'm so sorry I'm late. I had to finish something for tomorrow and it took longer than expected," she said, sweeping towards me in a cloud of musky perfume and sitting on the other end of the bench. "It's fine. I'm glad you're here." "Of course," she said. I looked at her. Her hair wild around her face, her cheeks flushed, and the first word that came into my head was radiant. I looked away. "How was your weekend?" She shrugged. "You know, the usual. Theatre with Rachel on Thursday night, sat on my own with a glass of wine and spin the wheel on Saturday, farmer's market on Sunday. Mediocre." She looked up. "Lonely." My belly fizzed. "I know what you mean," I said. "Pretty much the same for me apart from the TV show. Jonathan Creek for me." She frowned. "God, I haven't seen that in years. I didn't even know it was still on." I looked out across the park, watching as a young couple struggled with the rain cover on their pram. I hadn't even realised it had started to rain. "So," Emma said. "So? What do you want to talk about?" "Oh, I stopped. What did you talk about with a woman you'd only just met, who you didn't know and who you felt guilty about being wildly attracted to?" "Want to talk about your sugar addiction?" "What?" She smiled, her face lighting up again. "The pick and mix?" "Oh, yes," I smiled back. "I am partial to a fizzy cola bottle." "Well, you're in luck, because I've brought the snacks today." She opened the bag on her lap and dug around inside, then pulled out several packets of sweets one at a time, laying them on the bench between us. "Tangfastics, fruit pastels, Maltesers, and—" She pulled the last one out with a flourish. "Black currant and licorice in case you want something a bit more grown up." "Blimey, you don't do things by halves, do you?" I said, picking up the Tangfastics. "Can I open these?" "Go for it," she said with a wave. I opened the packet and held them out to her. "You choose first," she said. I pulled out a few, then handed them to her, and we both sat quietly chewing for a few moments. It was strangely relaxing. "So, you said this place was special to you," she said finally. "It is. Want to tell me about it?" Did I? Usually I hated talking about Dawn to anyone who'd never met her. Nothing I said ever conveyed how much she'd meant to me, how much we'd shaped each other. "This was the place I met Dawn," I said, tipping my head back and fixing my gaze on the peeling paint of the ceiling. "We were only 16, just babies, and we went to different schools, but we used to come here and hang out in the evenings, me and my mates, and one night she was here with some of her friends and, well, that was it. I couldn't see anyone else. It was all about her." I stopped, remembering the moment I first saw her, the way she consumed my thoughts from the moment I laid eyes on her, the way she shone. Could it be something about this place, some sort of supernatural force surrounding it that meant it would always be the place where magic happened? I shook my head. "Don't be so ridiculous." I turned to look at Emma. "Dawn was the love of my life, and I haven't really felt alive since she died." Until now, I wanted to say, but it was too much too soon. She raised her eyes to meet mine. "What happened?" "She had ovarian cancer. We thought she was pregnant. We were trying to get pregnant, had talked about nothing else for months and months. We'd even picked out names and colours for the nursery, had talked about what our future child might be like. Would they have my eyes or Dawn's? Would they be tall, short, skinny, blonde or dark? It was all we could think about. and we couldn't wait to be parents. But then, well, Dawn was unwell for quite a while. It turned out the bloating and the sickness were not, in fact, to do with forming a new life, but taking one away. I'm so sorry. I nodded, my words stuck in my throat. Emma looked back out at the park again, and I did the same. The dampness had turned to a light drizzle. Greg died in an accident at work. Her voice was quieter than before, and I had to lean close to hear her properly. He was a tree surgeon and fell from his harness. He died on impact. Oh, that's horrendous, I said. She gave a little shake of her head as if to say, I don't want to talk about it. It was bad enough coming to terms with that, but in the first few weeks after his death, I tortured myself with the words I'd said to him as he left that morning. Maybe I should find someone who gives a shit about having a baby with me then. She sniffed and wiped her hand across her cheek. Sorry, I don't talk about this very often. You don't need to apologize for anything. She shook her head. Anyway, this house is my fresh start. I thought I wanted to stay in the house where we'd lived together, but in the end it was too hard, seeing all the places that reminded me of him. I still live in the house where Dawn died. I looked up at her. Do you think that's maudlin? Not in the slightest. It's whatever works for you. A shout from the park distracted me, and I looked away to watch a group of children on bikes passing. I waited until they'd gone before I spoke again. They remind me of when I was that age. Who does? I nodded towards the park. Those kids. She looked out across the grass, and a frown flitted across her forehead. It's a nice place to hang out. It is, although this rickety old thing has seen better days. Emma looked round her. I don't know. I think it looks pretty good. I'm particularly fond of the graffiti down there that says, if you can read this, fuck off. Very eloquent, I feel. Almost Shakespearean, she grinned and picked up the Haribos. More sugar? Love some, thanks. We sat silently, chewing for a while longer. The rain had stopped now, but the low cloud made it feel chilly, and I shivered. Would you prefer to go somewhere warmer? I said. Are you cold? A bit. Oh, that reminds me, she said. She leaned down and pulled something out of her bag and presented it to me. Your jumper. Thank you for lending it to me. Oh, thanks. I'd forgotten I'd lent it to her, and it smelt of the outdoors, a flowery, heady scent. I pulled it over my head and felt instantly better. You said you're lonely, I said. Sometimes. She didn't look me in the eye. I see my friends, but it's little things. You know, when you're watching something together and laugh at the same things, or you want to ask the other person a question and you forget they're no longer there until the question has almost formed on your lips. She traced her finger over the worn grain of the wood. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and for a few minutes I forget that Greg is no longer there, and I roll over and see the empty side of the bed, and it makes my stomach lurch. She looked up at me. Do you know what I mean? I nodded, a lump in my throat. I do. I swallowed. Perhaps you've got the right idea moving to a new house, because sometimes being in the same room as we were together makes it even harder when a memory comes crashing in. A bolt of something jolted through me then, my entire body fizzing. When I looked down at the space between us, her hand was resting on top of mine. It was only there for a few seconds, but when she pulled her hand away, I felt odd, almost empty, as though she'd taken a part of my soul with her. What the hell was that? So, have you seen anyone else since Dawn died? I shook my head. No. Andy, my brother, thinks I should, and a couple of mates have tried to set me up with friends, but I just haven't been ready. I was starting to think I never would be. She smiled, sadly. Same here. Rachel even set me up a profile on Tinder, but I haven't looked at it since. What's that? What's what? Tyndall, or whatever you said. She gave me a strange look, small creases lining her forehead. Are you teasing me? I shook my head. You really don't know what Tinder is? I really have no idea. It was her turn to shake her head now. Wow, I didn't think there was anyone left in the world who hadn't heard of Tinder. It's a dating app. You know, where you put your details in, say what sort of person you're looking for, what you're like, and hopefully someone you like the look of likes the look of you too. She pulled back a bit and squinted at me. Is this really not ringing any bells? I held my hands out and shrugged. What can I say? I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy. You really are. A relic, almost. She smiled. It's nice. So what else do you like doing, apart from eating sweets and moping around this place? She said. I play the violin, I said. Are you any good? I shrugged, suddenly shy. I'm not bad. I've played here before. She looked round her at the run-down space, her eyes wide. Believe it or not, it was actually used for concerts years ago. That's pretty cool. She reached her hand out and pressed it against the cool metal strut. It's almost as though the notes and songs are trapped somewhere in the fabric of this place, waiting for someone to hear them again. That's a nice way to look at it, I said. Will you play for me one day? Her face reddened as though she realised what she'd just said a fraction too late. I'd love to, I said. Dawn had always loved listening to me play, and the thought of playing for someone else made me feel strange, as though I was cheating on Dawn, perhaps. But Dawn wasn't coming back, and I had to at least try to move on, to make a new life for myself, not to mention that the thought of seeing Emma again filled me with a feeling of hope and excitement. I'll bring it with me next time. Will we meet here again next time? Next time. It seems as good a place as any, don't you think? She nodded. I do. It was getting dark again now, and even the jumper Emma had returned to me wasn't quite enough.